Ooh. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this session. We're going to get started in just 2 or 3 minutes. We're going to let people come into the session. As you come into the session, it'd be great if you introduced yourself in the chat. If you put your name, your organization, and where you're zooming in from today. We'd love to hear all the different places where people are zooming in from. Really appreciate it. Here, and to help you out, I will give you some context. So Daniel, if you also want to let us know a little bit more about you as well. So hello, everybody. As you're joining us, please introduce yourself in the chat. I see there's plenty of people here coming online. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about you, get some information about you. If you would share it in the chat, name, your organization, where you're coming in from. Hi, Courtney. I know I talk to you often, my compatriots at Deloitte. Rowena, awesome. Glad you're here. Please introduce yourself in the chat as you come in. We'll get started in just a few minutes, but at this point, wanted to say hello and see who everyone is as they're coming in. So it'd be great for you to introduce yourself in the chat. Greetings, Scott. I see you're coming in from Geopol, but do you have a location? Are you in the, I think you might be in the DC area. Hello, Patrick. Welcome from Chicago, the Windy City, the third coast is sometimes referred to in the US at least. And welcome, Parisha from Spain. That's awesome. So when you are looking at the chat, you have two options. You have the option to send to host and panelist, and you have the option to send to everyone. Please make sure you are sending to everyone, not just host and panelist. We like to make sure that the introductions that you give reach to everybody. So please introduce yourself in the everyone option of the chat, not host and panelist. We actually want to have this as a pretty interesting, free-flowing discussion. So love to have your comments and your thoughts shared widely among all participants, not just us as panelists. Wow, hello from Zambia. Great, welcome. It's great that we have real international representation. See, it's Happy coming in from Netherlands. Welcome. And Mario from Guatemala. Thank you. Vienna, Austria. And someone coming also from DC. I think there might be a few people from Washington, DC. It's kind of a centric place in the US for international development. So we'll get started in just a few minutes, but wanted to, at this point, welcome everybody. Please keep introducing yourself in the chat. We'll start introducing ourselves in just a moment. Though if you want, you can hover over our names and you can start seeing our name, if you hover over our video feed, in the left-hand corner, you will see our name and our affiliation to help you. Andy, welcome from Albania. I think you might be the first person I've seen on Zoom from Albania, but thank you and welcome. And Brian, I like that you're a Zimbo, right? From Zimbabwe, yet you're in London, so welcome. All right. It's great seeing how international this group is so far. We've tried to put together an international consortia here as part of our discussion today on the concept and the benefit of universities. So it's great to have you all join. And remember, please introduce yourself in the chat using the everyone chat channel, not just the host and moderators. We're going to be watching the everyone channel, not the host and moderator channel. So if you are commenting in the host and moderator channel, I think, Jacob, you might want to check on that to make sure that we're catching everything. But short of that, please keep introducing yourself in the Everyone channel. It's where we're going to have our discussions and our concepts. So it's now 45 after 9:45 a.m. in Eastern time, or 45 after whatever time zone you might be in. So I want to get started and welcome everybody. So today our real conversation here is, how universities, how can we have this concept of university partnerships and partnering for digital development futures? What are the ways in which universities can help develop these enabling inclusive ecosystems for tech entrepreneurship in growing economies? And really this concept of, I really think of universities as a way for us to understand and think through and have great research around digital development and inclusive digital ecosystems, and then have insight from that we can support policymakers, business people, the NGO sector, humanitarian aid, and also entrepreneurs themselves, right? There's a level of training and engagement that universities can do. And I'm really excited because when I think of universities, they are always grounded in their community, right? They are part of the community. They are engaging with the community. They are directly members of the community. So in that sense, they're very much, to me, a locally based organization in the localities and where they are located. And I think we can learn a lot and understand a lot from their participation in development activities and development outcomes. So I'm going to now introduce myself and then tell you who we have on the panel here with us. And then I'm going to start asking our panelists questions as a way for them to introduce themselves and what they work on. While I'm doing this, please be putting questions, ideas, thoughts that you have that you want to ask in the chat. We will be incorporating the chat comments into our questions. So please be prolific in your questions, your comments, your thoughts around how we engage with and how universities engage with digital ecosystems. Regardless of the time zone, it might be, get that cup of coffee or tea and make sure that you're ready to go, because I think this is going to be a fun one. I'd love to have your engagement. So it's not just me pontificating. That's going to get old fast. So today with us, we have four, I think, distinguished university leaders. In no particular order, we have Douglas Barrios Gonzalez from University of Guatemala. And apologies if I'm messing people's names up from the begin with. I myself have a funny name, so I think we're all in the funny name club at some point. We have Anna Pentelik from MIT D-Lab and Mahadia Tunga from Tanzania Data Lab. Please be clear, those are two distinct organizations. And then Tim Weniger from University of Notre Dame. And hello, I am Wayne Vota and I am with Deloitte. Obviously not a university, but still having fun here to try to walk us through and think through some of the ways we can use these universities. So with that, I'm going to start asking some of our panelists some questions. While I do that, please keep introducing yourself in the chat. At the same time, please be thinking of and sharing your comments, your ideas, questions you might want to share with us in the chat, and we'll incorporate it in our discussion. And by the way, welcome to all the people that have been introducing themselves while I've been talking. It's great to see such a great, lively group this morning. All right. So, when we talk about universities, or at least when I think about them as, a way to have really this inclusive development, like thinking about bringing people together, bringing entrepreneurs, policymakers, business, NGOs, and a learning environment, right? In a place where we can really question and grow in our mindset. So I want to start asking some questions to our wonderful panelists to get them engaged in thinking, because you really don't want to hear me all day. So Mahatina, I want to start with you. And you have an amazing university program like the Tanzania Data Lab. How do you think, and how does the Tanzania Data Lab work to really grow digital ecosystems, both within Tanzania itself and East Africa in general?
Yeah, thank you very much. Tanzania Data Lab, our main mission is towards ensuring that data is being used for informed decisions. So in that, we collaborate with the universities to ensure that the programs that are offered, they have use cases to be applied for. That means for us is ensuring that university colleges from Tanzania, whatever student they are learning in class, they don't end up developing a toy project, but rather than a product that can be adapted to the environment. So with the university, we collaborate in different ways. One of them is through capstone programs, where we attach university students to what we call the challenge owner. So we identify organizations with tangible challenges that can be solved through technology, so that these students are developing their skills through real-world environment, while also learning from the experts in the field as addition to what they are learning from class. So this is one aspect that we collaborate with the university, but also we act as intermediary, where we connect with universities, with other universities for technology transfer. For instance, we have MOU with the University of Virginia in improving data science skills from MSc Data Science at the University of Dar es Salaam. We have MOU with other university from northern side to ensure that we improve. So we work basically in the two areas: act as an intermediary to ensure that the technology is being transferred, but the second aspect is ensuring that students are being exposed to real world challenges and learning from experts from the field. It's also adding to their portfolio as students. And one final way that we work, we also work with the hubs at the universities as we are running innovation challenges. So we recruit universities students as the innovators, but also we provide innovation clinics to these innovations at innovation hubs at the universities. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's really interesting, the concept of being an intermediary between universities and between the greater technology ecosystem and students and entrepreneurs. I like that concept there. Douglas, question for you. We have this interesting concept here where we have oftentimes intermediaries between national universities like yours and international universities like MIT. And building on what Mahadina said here about how the Tanzania Data Lab as an intermediary, how have US universities helped you all, the University of Guatemala, increase your ecosystem development in your country and in Central America writ large?
Thank you, Warren. Hello, everybody. I'm Douglas from Guatemala City. I work for the Universidad del Valle in Guatemala. We are a non-for-profit university, and we are a university that looks forward to implement ideas from the whole world in our country, make them usable to our people. Universities in the USA is a great source of ideas. For example, MIT that is here, we have followed some some technologies from them, especially to develop apps for children, for young people also. And we have elaborate a program on that to teach in school, at schools, how to create innovation, how to develop some software. People tend to think that technology is really hard. And in my countries, they say that's just for smart people, just for people who likes very much math and science. And we are saying, yeah, but you can do it also. You can enter this field. You can feel comfortable working with others. And so we also use the design school from Stanford documents, and that's wonderful. Design thinking, we introduced design thinking several years ago, and all our universities working with that in several areas, not just technology, from computer technology, but in other fields. Including social science innovation, psychology innovation, etc. So we are working with spreading this kind of thinking, innovation thinking, methodologies, and tools to help our society move to this field, to the knowledge society. I would like to talk some little examples. Our students are encouraged to work with real problems, real life problems. So we are working with our government. You would say, innovation is just for entrepreneurs. No, innovation is mainly for our government. We have several issues. We have serious problems, and we need to have another mindset to solve them. So we are working with our main justice system, following the recommendations of the legal design system of Stanford. We are working with innovation. We are working with systems, how to improve cybersecurity with them, how to develop user-centered design apps. We are working with several health institutions. Our students develop an AI system to detect some diseases in our countryside, and we are promoting ethical questioning. What it's about using AI? What about the bias that we introduce? What about if we don't have enough data to train the systems? And we also are also working with our employee sector. We are trying to establish a new curriculum to make our country more competitive, to offer BPOs opportunity for our people. So universities are a great place, and we are using technology ideas from all over the world. I saw in the chat also people from UK. UK is wonderful also to take ideas from them, but our university is like a gatekeeper. We receive information technologies, and we try to make them usable for our context, our society. And so we hear a lot of people working with NGOs. For example, not everybody has access to internet in Guatemala, so we have to figure it out how do we communicate with them. So we build our own networks networks that work without internet, and things like that. That's it's really a challenge working with new technology because we have to adapt it to our conditions. Thank you, Ryan.
I think you make a great point there, especially like when you were talking about the concept of a university as a place to question and think about the ethics, like the ethics of artificial intelligence and the bias that could be there, especially in that concept of, you know, a lot of the artificial intelligence, a lot of the data science is being created in the global north, a lot of it in Silicon Valley even, so not even in North Carolina where I live, but just in a small part of the US. And so it's great to hear that, you know, you're thinking and taking these ideas and saying, wait a minute, how they can be ethically used within the Guatemalan context or the Central American context, right? And really trying to think through that process, not just adopting what comes out of Silicon Valley blindly, but really thinking, you know, how is that applicable to our country? How is that applicable to the people in our country? And I think you were saying in an earlier conversation, there were dozens of languages or dialects in Guatemala, just in Guatemala and in, you know, Central America writ large. And of course, AI is almost always done on English or in English, and the data sets are English, right? So not even Spanish, the major
you're right.
just in English, right? And so talk about bias from the beginning. I mean, we of course have words that are not in Spanish, and there are Spanish words that are not English. And of course, you know, you've got the cultural context around each word. So, you know,
that's a big challenge. Every library that you download to work with in the frameworks of AI, deep learning, and anything, they have a lot of data and help English. But when you came down to Spanish, wow, we have to start working with that. Our students are working with artificial intelligence to recognize the mood of people when they listen music. This is done everywhere, but with music in English, with libraries in English. So we have to start from scratch, building our own knowledge. We are working with our psychology department to start building that kind of knowledge in our language and spreading it to other languages in our country. But we are starting with Spanish to make some libraries, some sort of data organization to know what's going on in our culture, in our language, pattern recognition, in natural language processing. It's really well, not easy, but it's most feasible when you do that in English. Like
let me guess,
starting with
probably
Twitter and the main social media. But when you came to Spanish, you have to develop your own tools, your own way of analyzing it, and that's great. That's amazing. And we would like to share with other people what we are learning and what they are learning in other languages. Just
I can think of, like, there may be very little in Spanish. There's absolutely nothing in Chichewa, I'm sure. So if we look here, actually in the chat, Anand Vargas of DAI said that they have just issued an ethical implications of AI, including partnerships between the global north and south and the language issues therein. So in the chat, I think that's an interesting link someone's already put. And Dorothea has added some useful standards for ICT4D research that we should be thinking about also in the chat. I like this concept of ethics that we should be applying across all of our activities, not just specifically in AI. So thank you for those comments in the chat. Please keep the comments, questions, and links coming as we progress. So now actually I want to move to Anna. And you know, we've been hearing here from universities in emerging economies. And question for you, I mean, what's the role of universities like like MIT or universities in general in the US or in North America, Northern Europe, what role should we be playing in the international development space?
Thanks, Wayne. And I have to say, I was chuckling in the previous conversation because I actually wrote my doctoral dissertation at the University of Belgrade in Serbia, which was written in a different language and in a different script. I had to create my own separate kind of dictionary, mini dictionary, which I included in the back just to make sure that I not only translated it correctly, but to make sure that everybody understood. And I also didn't have access to a number of different journals and databases. So I was constantly going to my US-based colleagues, hey, could you download this paper? Because until you download it, you can't tell how relevant or useful it would be. So to really understand the barriers to entry in academia outside of kind of well-resourced US-based universities, I think is really important. And putting us all in an equitable playing field, I think is really critical. So I would say first and foremost to start with understanding those kinds of barriers, like what Douglas was just pointing out to exploring the opportunities for collaboration and the roles that universities can have, as Mahalia was talking about as well. I think, at MIT, it's an interesting place to be because MIT is such a technical university. And so there is a strong interest in science and technology and a growing interest for having social impact. MIT D-Lab is a group that's been around for nearly 20 years. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. Yeah. And we work with people around the world to design and develop and advance collaborative solutions and collaborative approaches and practical solutions to addressing some of the global poverty challenges. And I think what's critical is the way that we do that. So we do it kind of through three core things that we do, which is educate, investigate, and disseminate. First and foremost, working with students at MIT and kind of creating more globally engaged citizens. Whether or not a student will go into the private sector, which many of them do, they come out of their MIT D-Lab courses or trips or explorations or research opportunities with a greater sense of the world, because our focus is in international development and because we look to address the global poverty challenges, whether it's through mechanical engineering and through products and solutions, or kind of looking at more the ecosystems or supply chains and where they can make a difference. So one is that first part of exposure of students. The second is around the research. And some of these principles that we've talked about here are really baked into our values and our mission. Things like practicing humility every day, having open and honest conversations, learning to listen, and championing not just design for the end user, but design with, which we also know as co-design, and ultimately actually design by the end user. So and building the creative capabilities of people living in poverty to design their own solutions, which oftentimes comes at a huge cost in terms of getting folks up to speed or building out those networks that would allow them to design solutions locally. But I think that it's a really important way of thinking about the transfer of power and thinking about the kind of the ethical implications of research. One of the areas of work that I think is really interesting is looking at lean research, which is a portfolio that we're working on with Tufts University as well. So how can you really synthesize research to the most basic element and only ask the questions that most advance your challenge? And questioning ourselves too. Sometimes it's for technology, and I've been a tech founder working in rural areas throughout Latin America, and I thought that the biggest challenge would be, how do you design the technology? As a social scientist, I didn't know anything about technology. So how do you kind of build that out? But that's sort of the easy part. The harder part is the human aspect of it. How do you disseminate? How do you distribute? How do you understand the local context and the networks? And what I found that it's actually, when you think about designing in technology, it's about tech, it's also about touch, and ultimately it's about trust. And building those three things together when you're doing design. And I think that third piece around the role of universities to disseminate, it's not just about disseminating knowledge, but also creating a platform where you can bridge connections between folks at different universities, where you can elevate the knowledge of others in a way that I think can be really transformative. And this really speaks to MIT's values, which I love. It's very unique to the university, but in their values statement, they really say that on a campus without gates, we champion the open sharing of information and ideas. And so that means we invite information and knowledge in, we value it, and we promote as much open and creative sharing out. So that's, when Douglas mentions learning from some of these initiatives, it makes me really happy to see the ways in which as educators, as academics, as researchers, and even as practitioners, we're slowly moving toward less of a competition mindset and more of a collaboration. Because if we want to contextualize, if we want to have relevant solutions, if we want to build on digital ecosystems, we should be talking about what India has done with the Aadhaar system and learning from massive efforts on digital identity, and looking at applying those in other contexts. We should be learning more and championing cases like the East African tech boom and mobile money and digital systems, and looking at how we might implement that in the United States with cash transfers, for example, that were just passed as a result of the pandemic. So there's a lot of knowledge and sharing that we can do across borders. And I think that we are uniquely placed in universities to promote that because of the incentives as well that exist in terms of knowledge sharing. So I'm really excited that we have such a diverse panel, and I'll end there. Thank you.
Well, Anna, I think you brought up a really good point about trust and that concept. And I think that universities are well positioned to be a trusted source in a community. And Tim, that actually brings me to you and some of your research, because you've been looking at misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and the erosion of trust, especially in the online space, right? Which is kind of scary in that concept. So how have you all been working and thinking about this in contexts within the US, of course, but also internationally?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to chat with you all. First of all, as a bit of an introduction, I'm a researcher in AI and machine learning. So that's where I sit, classically trained computer scientist in data mining, machine learning. I publish in the machine learning journals and conferences. We've been recently studying, actually not recently, for the past 10, 15 years, been studying this idea of, I wonder what would happen if me and my friends got together and decided to artificially promote some idea. What kind of impact would that happen? What would that have online? So in the social space, of course, in the past 5, 6 years have been really, I don't know, I don't want to use the word exciting or interesting in this research case, but really kind of illuminating about how people are communicating online. This has only gotten more and more pertinent in the past 2 years with COVID. And now the internet and the digital technologies are mediating almost all of online human communication. And we almost all of, not just online, just all of human communication. If you think about this conference, for example, right? We're all on Zoom. I have the urge to go to Facebook right now. And if I was in a conference, and I'm speaking right now, right? I still have that urge. If I'm in a conference, that kind of social mores and norms are completely different. And then how we think about just the human enterprise, about how we communicate with one another online, how we share information, how we talk to one another, how we get to know one another has changed completely in the past 10 years, and especially in the past 2 years. And so these are the things that universities are interested, have a position to kind of dig at, these deeper questions about what does it mean to do a thing? What does it mean to have a thing? These understandings of how humans are behaving, broadly speaking. Another thing that universities have, I think that, so, and Anna did a wonderful job of talking about kind of the role of international universities like MIT, Notre Dame, and others. But I think especially what we have is we have young people. We have access to the young people. And that's why companies and NGOs and organizations flood the universities, because they want access to the young people. And we have them. And why the young people? Because those are the energetic future leaders of tomorrow, right? And that's an interesting thing. Our job is to educate, mold, and house these people for 4 years, maybe 5 or 6, and then send them off into the world. And what we endowed them in their 4 years at a university is really, really important. Not only the knowledge and the technical know-how, but the values. And that's speaking to what Anna was saying earlier. Notre Dame, for example, is kind of the opposite of MIT. We are a university that has traditionally been thinking about kind of global development and has recently gotten into technology, right? So only the past 20 years has our computer science department really grown and thrived. Now in that area, we've been working in disinformation, specifically in Indonesia. I'm happy to chat about that. more in detail as questions come in. But happy to be here and happy to chat with you all and answer questions.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point when you're talking about what if my friends and I, and how digitally literate people are can become very digitally savvy and then be wellsprings of either good information or misinformation, disinformation. And I think there's a concept here that we should be bringing more people into the fold, but at the same time, making sure that they have an understanding of what they're getting into. I mean, I'm just thinking here, the concept of introducing, you said you wanted to go to Facebook. I think like the concept of introducing Facebook to an unsuspecting populace, we are seeing some countries where they are eliminating Facebook as a tool, as an option for people, as a way to keep their society from being negatively influenced.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. And the thing that I kind of think about is there's still 2 billion people in the world that don't have access to the internet. And as that grows, as that number shrinks from 2 billion down to 1 billion down to, fewer and fewer people, they're given access to these devices. And we show them Facebook, and then they see that, they start scrolling the headlines and they say, well, what is this? This is, and folks who might not understand how the algorithms work, all those things, it brings up this idea of education and digital literacy. And then of course there's who does education? Well, universities. And so is there a role for universities in that space as well? I think yes, and that's actually what we're doing more specifically in the Indonesian context, which I can talk about later.
Well, I remember one of my forays into this, I was trying to train a woman on the concept of the internet, and I sat her down in front of the Google screen, the homepage with the big question box. And I said, ask it any question you want. Google knows all the answers. It's like this is huge brain that will give you every answer to any question you want. So she said, okay, ask it what will happen tomorrow. And man, talk about like right to the point of an intense question. So to that point, Mahadina, I think you have been working a lot with people in groups that are not necessarily computer savvy at the start. How have you been thinking this concept or working this concept of making sure that we have an inclusive digital ecosystem, and it's not just a digital ecosystem for the haves who have more, but really thinking, how have you been thinking about how we can make this an inclusive digital ecosystem for everyone?
Yeah. I'm completely in the different contexts
Okay.
By just sharing the context where like 77, I think, % of women have access to mobile phone, and around 80% for men. But when it comes to internet access for women is only 17%, those who have mobile phone with internet access. And men, it's around 35%. So when talking about digital and like access to digital in our context, so we have few people online. That was technically what means. So, and before I just jump into the inclusive part, but I am facilitating one of the MSc data science courses. And one of the major challenges that we face is that our students, we fail to get data that is in the local context that is available online. Because of two main things. One, first is we are not online first. So if you want to get to do the sentiment analysis or etc., it's quite limited. And most of the time, if you look at the coverage, it will be mainly at the cities, and not the technology has not been penetrated at the remote areas. So that is quite a challenge. In a sense that even when you design your content, when you're training people at the cities, and when you go at the local government, you will need to switch the approach. like of using the printout and etc. And I think you might have seen there is a certain photo going around where in the local schools, they're training computer application using a diagram of a computer, like a teacher has drawn using a chalk on the board and trying to tell that this is a mouse, this is something, because we don't have computers at the local level. So in terms of the digital space, it's quite a challenge. So on how for us we are intervening in that space. So for us, we work at the we also work at the secondary schools where we are training them on digital literacy and coding skills. But our approach, because of this context, our approach is normally we ask for one class during a semester where we train them on the concepts, but they don't practice. And then during holidays, they come to the lab for practice. So practice normally comes at the lab because also of infrastructure. Some of the schools don't have electricity and the like, so they cannot actually do the practice. So that's how we do. But the major challenge in this context is on the regions where we don't have either labs or colleges, because for the secondary schools, we leverage holidays to take them to the colleges where we have access to the labs. So you can imagine that those are at the disadvantage. The gap is actually being widened in a sense that you cannot reach out to them even if you want to. So in terms of inclusivity for us, that's how, I mean, that's the aspect. And of course, most of our programs focus more on women because at the tertiary level in Tanzania, it's only around 30% of women at the tertiary level. That's why we try to, especially for the technology aspect, we try to like entice those who are at the lower level so that they can have appetite to take STEM subject at the higher level, but also getting a picture on what they can do with the technology for them to build that appetite. So for us, the challenge is the infrastructure in terms of reaching out to different groups of society. Because in Tanzania, it's only at the university level is where we have these computer courses. So most at the lower level, some of the students, they actually see for the first time computer when they're at the college, and most of them, because I've also taught in basic computer application some years back for the undergrad. So there's that challenge of adapting to the content so that you don't end up introducing you don't end up training them on how to use computer, but rather than also jumping into to ensure that you're also covering the syllabus. So that is if I'm wearing the hat as the academic. So yeah, so that is our our context.
Well, Mahatina, I like that concept you were putting forth, this of how many people have a mobile phone access, how many people have internet access, and then from there, how many people actually know how to use the tools of the mobile phone or internet to get anything done. I think that really speaks to this gap that we have. And Anna, I want to come back to you because I saw in the chat that you were excited that this, she brought up the gender gap. And there are many other gaps as well. How have you been approaching this, or how do you see the MIT D-Lab thinking through and trying to bridge some of these gaps?
I think one of the challenges is sometimes in international development is this thinking in a vacuum or making assumptions about places without having spent time there. And there's a lot to be said about the power of proximity. When you design from a lab or from a desk versus for the reality and the context, it's a very different experience. And even when you think you know, or people tell you what they want, it's very different once your technology is deployed and put into practice, and you start to see all kinds of things that are popping up. It was interesting as Tim was talking through and talking about Facebook, you did this. And it's funny because this is not what people don't know what that is if they've never used technology before. You know, in Mahadia's case, when she was talking about women, it's about, you know, even when you talk about the power of mobile money, well, you know, who gets to own the device that might receive a cash benefit from, you know, from the government or from a charity? It's typically the man. Who gets to control resources within the household? Who gets the opportunities? What happens when there's the first financial cut? Who gets to continue their education or not? I mean, we're excluding the majority of the population if we're not designing for women, and I think that that's really important. I think we could take this panel discussion in so many different directions. I think within international development at MIT D-Lab, our focus has really been on people living in extreme poverty and understanding at those kind of most grassroots level or in rural areas, how do you address and how do you design for those kind of greatest challenges? I also think that the power in university and in higher education institutions is to think about the rails and the systems and how we can have this higher level impact on the ecosystem. And we need to do a bit of both. On the one hand, we need to champion opportunities for education and to really nurture the talent and youth. You know, Tim was mentioning people want young people, right? Like companies are coming in because they're super excited about that momentum. You want young people, go to Africa, like the African subcontinent, you know, there's so much potential. And the challenge that we're finding in the international development spaces is also, once you've addressed things like health and education, you get kids to go to school, great, they're there. When do we start asking the question, what's the quality of the education that they're receiving? What are the opportunities that they have afterward? And who's there to support them when they come home and they're doing their homework? You know, it's not just about getting kids to go to school. It's also about understanding that, you know, when they go back home, they're not able to do their homework. They have to go and work in the fields or dig in the fields. I was just spent the last 2 years in Uganda, so that's my frame of reference. But you know, I think that we have the responsibility to ask ourselves these kinds of questions, to understand that we're not at the same level of playing field, but that doesn't mean that there's not potential and power. You know, we talk a lot about these opportunities. We talk about emerging markets or growing economies. It's does the world a disservice if we don't open up dialogues and conversations across the board and around the world, and that we don't share ideas openly and generate these exchanges. If there's an opportunity as a well-resourced institution to bring in some of those things, we want to do that. At MIT D-Lab, what we try to do is also bring some of these ideas and approaches from the international development space to really foster an ecosystem within the university to nudge folks to think about international development and create greater awareness. There's a lot of social and environmental issues around the United States, but if we want to, you know, be global citizens and globally engaged, I think it's really important to foster and promote those kind of international collaborations. And that's one of the big things that we do as kind of a convener and a catalyst. It's one of the roles that we have at MIT D-Lab.
Well, thank you for that. I think it's interesting that the concepts you are putting forth there and how we can think about this larger idea of, you know, engaging students and helping them learn and helping them be better citizens, right? I think also switching a little bit here, Rob Worthington asked in the chat, where's the most reliable data source for internet access, mobile access, disaggregated by different concepts? And I don't have the greatest answer for that because I think it's GSMA, but you know, GSMA is a mobile operator interest group, so it can be a little tweak. So if you know of it, please know of a better source for information or just different sources for information, please put that in the chat so you can educate Rob and all of us. And then Tim, I wanted to go back to you because also in the chat, Courtney asked about the concerns around misinformation, disinformation, and she was interested in hearing about how you might be engaging students in that and potential entrepreneurs in that concept of soft skills. the soft skill understanding. I think
Right.
Anna was also alluding to that a lot, and what she was just saying. So how are you thinking about that concept of, everything else after they understand how to touch and manipulate the tool?
Right, and that's I think a critical question. And from the computer science and machine learning AI point of view, if you're at Facebook or Twitter or WhatsApp or name your social media platform, it's very difficult to convince them. And in fact, I don't even think there is a technological solution to this problem of misinformation and disinformation. Like you can create all the machine learning AI tools you want to try to put guardrails on, but ultimately, I think that the problem of disinformation, misinformation, and digital literacy in general is a question of values. And so it's a matter of convincing people that it's a good thing to get unbiased information, to show them the problems and the maladies of bad information, and convince yourself first and then other people that how misinformation spreads. It doesn't spread because it spreads because the algorithm, and there's bots and there's Russian trolls and all of that, and those are problems. But really, if you are motivated to find information that confirms your previously held beliefs, you will find that information. And there's a whole psychology literature around this. It's a question of convincing people to go after the information that's correct. It's a question of values. Now, those soft skills, it's really it's a question of just simple digital literacy. Just here's the maladies and the bad things that exist currently and things to watch out for. But then more than that is to think, recognize your reaction to what you see online. Don't share that potentially, that inflammatory or completely false thing.
I'm not going to get more likes and clicks on the things that I put out. Come on, Tim, you're going against the human nature, the desire to be popular.
Exactly. So basically, all of human nature in the past 10,000 years of social norms and development, ignore all of that.
Facebook is hacking all of that.
Right. So that's where, like, I go to bed sometimes like this is just it's a lost cause. There's no way I can change 10,000 years of human development. But we'll figure it out. We have to. And we've actually been studying, and that's the question that Rob has. Scott Lansell at Geopol, I think, is on the chat somewhere. He's been doing surveys actually with us, getting at those questions of asking people directly, do you have internet access? What device do you have? What are your age, gender, and so on? So Scott actually has some of that, and Geopol has some information on that. The reason I bring that up is because we actually ask questions about digital literacy and your sharing behavior and different questions like that. One thing we learned is that the young people, especially if you've been around for a little while, have figured this out. They're much less susceptible to sharing fake news and misinformation. They're much more media savvy. I have a feeling that we're going to figure this out as a society, just as social norms change and percolate through society. But it's going to take a lot of us to have a change in the right direction.
Tim,
and universities have a big part of that.
Yeah, I made my change. I'm no longer on the book face, so I've left it.
Have you?
Yes.
Very good. I'm on Facebook, right now. So
there you go. That's scary. Really scary. You might have a problem, Tim. You might have a problem.
You're right.
So Douglas, I'm going to shift our mindset here and away from the tweet birds and all the other things that talk ticks that one might have. And Douglas, I think there's an interesting comment or question here in the chat from Dorothea at IGSD Sheffield. She's saying that she wants to work with local universities and she's excited to work with universities like yours, but she is often finding that national universities are very strapped for time. The researchers are trying to focus on research. They don't necessarily have time to co-lead a project or be a principal investigator because their teaching duties are so intense. Have you seen that challenge at University of Guatemala? And if so, how are you all trying to mitigate that issue?
Thank you. But I just want to say something about what Tim says before.
Okay.
Okay. Because we are studying now cybersecurity from not the technology point of view, but from the people's point of view. We always say people is the problem. They don't know how to protect themselves. They are so naive that they share their passwords, etc. We always blame.
Let's be clear. People are always naive. Like I share my password
but they're not
things
true.
with my family. I know alcohol is bad for me, but I still drink it. I mean, you know, we're humans, right? We are, as humans, we have our failures, right? So
yeah. But we are working our research in behavioral psychology, and we are finding out why is people behaving that way. And we as technologists, we must have to know that in order to prevent those problems, in order to teach them the right things to do, not to link, to click on every link they receive, to avoid ransomware, etc. So the human part of technology is much more important than the technology itself. Its values, its knowledge, its social science, is how do we protect this society if we want to use technology the right way. So that's a huge area for research. For us in technology, we have to make connections with other disciplines, not just innovation, not just artificial intelligence, but some other fields. And now returning to your questions, I would like to say that there are kind of universities. In my country, we have teaching universities. Research is part of us. We at my university were the first university that publish much research in our country, but we have some teachers that are doing the research, mainly research, but like me, I am only a teacher. So, we lead projects for the society. We have to teach students. We have to talk with the industry to see what they need. We have to work with NGOs to see what is the best way to do things in their local communities, etc. So we try to balance research and other kind of activities, and I think that's the main way in Guatemala. We have so many problems that we have to work with that problems.
Okay.
And
thank you,
working
Douglas.
with them, we do our research. And we share the best practices. We share what technologies make sense in that in some problems, etc. So we tend to balance both areas.
Great, thank you. We have time for one last question, and this one actually I think is a great one from Simone or Simon, who's asking about sustainability of university impact when you have a cycle of students. And Mahadina, I think you would have a great answer to that, because I'm also thinking that Tanzania Data Lab just had a large conference that was greater than students. So kind of a way here for universities to have impact beyond the student churn. Over to you.
Yeah, so to respond in that question, I'll respond in two ways. First, in terms of the project that students are implementing. So for us, we adapt on problem-based learning and multi-competence learning. where you have this complex problem and you break down into the smaller chunks, and that students are working in the bits, filling in the larger problem. In that way, so you plan in a sense that as the student exit, other students can be able to take over rather than leaving the whole project working on under specific group, but breaking it into different parts so that it can be easy for other groups to adapt and continue in the implementation, and also be aware of the nature of the technology, whether if they're using open source approach, so that it's easy to it's easy for other students to take over. But in terms of also sustainability, again, beyond students, for beyond the universities, for us, for instance, in Data Tamasha, so we organize the community as a community event, so that each one gets ownership to the event, and this is normally in showcasing what you have been achieved throughout the 2 years of running the program. And we run with the private and university government. So it becomes a community event rather than as a lab event or university event. And there is where you can get different stakeholders contributing to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's a great point, is, really having that university engagement with the community, brings the community in, brings everybody together, and make sure there is sustainability beyond just the educating of students, but actually really, empowering them to be future leaders, as Tim said earlier, but also the concept that universities as a whole really are engaging all aspects of the stakeholders in the community. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for our participants who came and joined us. We are at our time, but I see that there are still some people putting ideas in the chat. Feel free to keep commenting as you see. We're going to keep talking for a little bit here, and if you want to stay with us until Tanya or the powers that be at CRS yank the power cord out of the wall and cut us off. But love to still discuss some ideas here, because I think to me this is really fascinating, the concept of how we can use and leverage universities as a real fulcrum to improve development outcomes. But if you have to get to the next session or you have to move on, that's quite all right. We still, though, would love to continue having a few minutes of dialogue here, because I mean, there are so many questions I wanted to get to. We didn't have time to get to. It feels. So I actually have a question. I'll do round robin. Anna, I want to start with you. What's something, if we're thinking about how to work with policymakers to enhance the digital environment, how do you think we can do that? Or what do you think we should be thinking about? And I'm thinking here, engaging policymakers mainly in countries in which we work versus the US.
Yeah, I can speak to that from my kind of my past life, which is mostly working with policymakers and working on kind of large scale social protection systems. I think that there's a lot of opportunities to embed technology, both in kind of the systems that support government provision of services, as well as in the design of different technology-based solutions that can kind of provide that last mile support to people kind of living in poverty. I'd mentioned the Aadhaar system in India. I think there's a really interesting work that's being done through the societal platform and looking at these questions around having very simplified infrastructures through which you can add and layer on additional public services, and to think about the ways in which technology plays a role in shaping things and shaping policy, and also kind of the societies that we live in. I will say, based on the previous conversation, one thing that is really important when thinking about the academic perspective, and now I'm wearing went from policymaker hat to practitioner hat.
Right.
Think about the incentive structures that you have in place. Having worked with researchers, they can provide tremendous sources of information and data. But if their incentive is a peer-reviewed publication with a very specific timeline, and they have to go through a set of rigorous processes and procedures, you may not get the kind of answers you're looking for as quickly as you might want. So if you're a social entrepreneur looking to change things or move quickly, that partnership, you should just be aware of kind of the timelines that you're working on. And I think that, conversely, academics are moving more towards a mindset of, from bridging theory and practice, and how can I see what I do in the real world? It's one of the things that I think is one of the biggest incentives for faculty that come through D-Lab, that work with MIT's D-Lab, to really see their ideas and the research put into practice and context, and to change, revolutionize people's lives. So it's not just about, analyzing a particular material to understand, can it function as a water filter, but also working to understand how people drink water, access water, store water, drink water, use it, cook with it, etc. In countries where the closest access point might be more challenging. So bridging theory and practice, which goes back to MIT's values statement, this concept of learning by doing is something that we really champion, which I think is incredibly important. It's an excellent mindset for teaching with students, but also just to constantly be thinking about how we bridge theory and practice, putting yourself in the shoes of someone. And sorry to belabor this point, but I'm really, governments can provide such an important vehicle for scale when it comes to change within country context, but you are moving at different speeds than you might within the private sector. It's incredibly important to be aware of that and to understand their incentives, and keep in mind that that policymaker is accountable to millions of people who pay taxes, who, they have to make sure that they follow processes and procedures to the line, because that's their responsibility. I think governments have an important role to play, but these partnerships, whether it's policymakers or academics or practitioners or private sector or technologists, you name it, we all have to understand each other's perspectives, understand the incentives. There's power in proximity, have conversations, engage with each other, and work on solutions together. I think that's really the best way to get any kind of traction, really. Yeah.
Well, thanks. I think I was watching Mahadina nod her head often as you were talking about incentives. And I think that also gets back to the point that Douglas was making earlier. And one of the questions we had around how do you engage with universities to move things along. And I think, we do have to think about the incentives of the universities, the incentives of the students, the incentives of government, private sector. What are the timescales they're working on, to the point you were making, Anna? And also, what is our incentive, and does our incentive match up with theirs? And how can we align ourselves with the incentives that others are working with versus just thinking about our own? So with that, I'd like to thank everybody. Thank you all as panelists for coming along in this journey, this learning journey that we've had today, talking about universities and the concept of how they can be integral to development. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for participating, and thanking for the attendees that are still along with us right now listening to this. So thank you so much, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Wayne.
All right, Tanya, you can end it.